Greetings, dear viewers, and welcome to Mengizem Media. My guests today are Chairman of Amhara Association of America, Tewodros Tirfe, and Director of Communications of Amhara Association of America, or AAA, Robel Alemu. We will discuss about the recent Fano leaders press briefing and some of the current political affairs in Ethiopia. Please stay with us. Thank you for joining me, my guests.
Reeyot, thank you for having us on your program today.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you again. Let's start from April 13th, Amhara Fano Leaders exclusive press briefing facilitated by Amhara Association of America. What was your objective when you facilitated the discussion, and how was it, Tewodros?
Reeyot, thank you. So the overall purpose of organizing this press briefing for the Fano leaders with the foreign media and also geopolitical analysts is so that the Fano leaders can speak themselves to the international community about their goal, their purpose, the genocidal war of the Abiy Ahmed campaign against the Amhara people, the immense humanitarian crisis that the Amhara people are facing. This is not the first time that we've done a briefing of this nature. We have done media briefings for the Fano leaders in the past, but this was the first time that we had all of the four major leaders at one time with several foreign journalists and also geopolitical analysts. But one of the things that AAA prides itself on is being a conduit and creating a platform for Amhara leaders in Ethiopia to engage with international stakeholders, whether they are foreign journalists, geopolitical analysts, think tanks, U.S. members of Congress, or the State Department. So this is something that we have been doing really since AAA was established, and this is something that we will continue to do. Earlier today, we also had organized another briefing with Reuters for the Fano leaders as well. In my opinion, I believe that the Fano leaders did an excellent job responding to several questions that was brought to them by the foreign journalists. And really, they are articulate when it comes in terms of what is the goal and the purpose of the Fanos, responding to questions about negotiations and dialogue, and also really going into immense detail with regards to the humanitarian crisis that the Fanos are facing. So really, this is something that all Amharas should be very proud of in terms of how the Fano leaders are able to articulate these issues, and we're going to continue to do that.
Okay. I have listened to the audio and also I have read the transcript of press briefing, but I didn't find the name of the foreign journalists on it. Why was that, or who are the foreign journalists and analysts, Robel?
Certainly. Thank you, Reeyot. Yes, this was by their request. They requested for some discretion not to be named, and I think part of that is for their safety, as there are some who are located or based in Addis Ababa or elsewhere in Ethiopia. And as we know, for a long time, there's been a lot of reprisal-based incidents in which human rights investigators, including those that work for international organizations or sometimes domestic ones or others that report on violations or anything that's considered undesirable by the ruling party, could face targeting. And so this is something that was deliberate. But in the future, if there are incidences where they are willing to have themselves be identified, especially in this kind of a public venue, then we have no problem making that available. With that being said, just to add on to what Tewodros was saying,
I can add one thing, Robel. Reuters was willing to be named. So Reuters was one of the medias that was present at the press briefing 2 weeks ago, as well as a representative from ACLED was also present. The Guardian last minute had to pull it out. They requested the audio. We sent them an unedited audio of that. So what we shared with the public is a very edited version of the audio, but what we shared with the other journalists is the unedited version. So I can say that Reuters and ACLED were present. They were okay with being named there.
Okay.
In addition, today as well. Today, Reuters was also present.
Okay, okay.
Go ahead, Robel.
Robel, you can.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on that essentially this kind of engagement is done by the request at times from these journalists, from these different stakeholders. For a long time, AAA has worked with engaging with different stakeholders from media, from government, from various policymakers, think tanks, and other international institutions. And much of the time, we find that there is certainly a gap in knowledge and a lack of understanding or sometimes misunderstanding of the situation in Ethiopia, as well as the perspective of the Amhara people, including what Amhara leaders would say in response to key questions, as Tewodros mentioned, in regards to negotiations, in regards to the current situation, their assessment of what's happening. And so AAA serves as an intermediary to facilitate this kind of engagement and ensure that there is accurate understanding of some of these key issues. With that being said, AAA's focus is on the human rights situation, as is evidenced by AAA's independent human rights reporting. But with that being said, there is certainly a very strong and important need for engagement with these Amhara leaders, because these are really the leaders who are in some areas actually administering areas of the Amhara region. And so, it's very important for the international stakeholders to become acquainted with these leaders. And for example, this could facilitate further collaboration and work between the two sides, especially in terms of, for example, delivering humanitarian aid. There's a very dire humanitarian situation in many parts of the region, and there's a very strong belief held by the community that the government is not responsible when it comes to distribution of aid. It's not distributed equitably, or sometimes it doesn't reach where it's supposed to go at all. And so under these areas that are liberated, it becomes possible for these leaders to, for example, do that. And I think this kind of facilitation has been done or required in the past, but activities like this become more widespread and normalized when it becomes when the Fano are better understood by international actors.
Okay, thank you. The attending Fano leaders were Abebe Fentau, Asras Mara Damte, Bayan Alamau, and also Asaged Mekonnen. My question is, there are different Fano groups and leaders. What was the criteria to select this ones among other study?
There wasn't really any criteria in terms of these are the Fanos that we want and these are the Fanos that we don't want. It was really mainly of availability, and which is very, very difficult. Logistically, to set this up is very difficult, Reeyot, because there is no internet connection in the entire Amhara region at this moment. So we cannot use WhatsApp or Signal. For most of these Fanos, you have to call directly. So the phone number that works, this week is not going to work the next week or the following week. So a lot of it is based really on availability. And sometimes the leaders that they give us that they want to be part of the press briefing are to engage with diplomats. When we call that number, sometimes they might not be available because, again, either they are active in, military operations in the battlefield, or just because of the network issues. So it was really more in terms of availability. So we use a variety of sources to help us reach the Fano leaders. I want to say from the outset, the Amhara Association of America does not represent the Fanos. We don't claim to represent the Fanos here in the diaspora. We are not affiliated with any of the Fano groups. We are not also affiliated with any Amhara political party or political party here in the US or Canada, where we also have leaders such as Robel and Hone. So as I said earlier, and as Robel has said, this is not something new that we have done. As a result of that, for the media briefing, the point.
If I can interject.
Huh?
If I can interject, just a quick supplementary with what you were saying. I think you described it very accurately. I think what I would add is AAA was very transparent in saying that this was not an exhaustive list of all Fano leaders. So the ones that were present, the representatives that were present, do not represent all of the leaders on the ground. But the objective was to have the first ever press briefing with these international stakeholders. This is something that has not been done before. And given the challenges with logistics and organizing such a meeting due to security reasons and other concerns, I think the objective was just to have some type of representative from each of the 4 sub-regions. So there was one from Shoa, one from Gondar, Gojam, and Wadlo. And so I think that was accomplished. And I think some of these key questions, it's surprising actually that it's been over a year since this war has taken place, and no such press briefing has been organized. And so this was, I think, a very key gap that needed to be addressed. And given, how fast things are moving on the ground and the dynamic nature of the situation, we felt it was very important to organize this very crucial meeting to facilitate understanding. And we expect that as going forward, as the structures on the ground begin to consolidate and have more of a centralized structure, it's going to become easier to facilitate future sessions in which the spokespeople can represent all of the Fano groups on the ground. And I think that was also a key theme that emerged within the actual press briefing, with one of the questions being, what was the progress towards centralization? And it seems that the Fanos responded that there is significant progress underway towards centralization, and this work is continuing to be done and should be something that's finalized in the near future. So that's what I can say about that.
Thank you, Robel. And Reeyot, I think as the Fanos come together, as they've done in Gojam, as they've done in Wallo now, and they've done also in Gondar, it will make it easier in terms of for facilitating these types of interviews. But it is very, very challenging when these types of engagements are done with foreign diplomats or medias. One of the things that we found that was really interesting is, for example, today, when there was calls being made to organize, the press briefing with Reuters, several of the Fano groups were insisting, oh, we need to make sure this Fano leader is present, this Fano leader is present. And that actually delayed the time in which the briefing started with Reuters. But, it shows that they communicate, they coordinate, and they respect each other. And they want, all of them to be present when they're engaging, foreign stakeholders. The other thing I think that's also important to note is that, when these Fanos are engaging, foreign journalists, it could be 4, it could be 5, it could be 6 Fanos that are present in this media briefing. But not all of them necessarily would be coded. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3. That's not up to us. We don't control that. The Fanos do not control that. It is the journalist that controls that, depending in terms of how they are narrating the story and their approach. And this is something that we really want our community to understand. But hopefully in the future, an organization like Tirfe does not need to facilitate this. Hopefully in the future, there isn't an internet blackout, and the Fano leaders will be able to directly communicate with foreign journalists, or really just with foreign stakeholders, and really also medias across the world, including Ethiopian-based medias.
As Robel said, one of the questions on the press briefing was about the centralization. The other question was about negotiation with the government. The Fano leaders replied, no negotiation. There is opinion of people that saying no for negotiation creates bad image for Fano. Rather, it is good to put preconditions. What is your view on this, if you are comfortable to comment?
I mean, Reeyot, we have our own perspective as an organization, obviously, right? But we're not on the battlefield fighting. And the view of the Amhara Association of America is that you cannot negotiate with a regime that is committing a genocide against you. Abiy Ahmed and the Oromo Prosperity Party and those affiliated with this political party must be brought to justice. Part of the reason why we are witnessing what we are witnessing right now in Ethiopia, a civil war that really has started since 2020, is because there was no effort made to have true national dialogue after TPLF was removed from Addis Ababa. There was no effort made to have true reconciliation and transitional justice and hold all the perpetrators accountable. There wasn't. And so how can, if people do not feel that justice was rendered, if people do not feel that there was any kind of, compensation for the suffering, how can, people move forward and move on? And so, that is our perspective. That is our view. And the Fanos have also expressed their view, as you had said in the press briefing, and that they cannot negotiate with Abiy Ahmed, and they do not believe that Abiy Ahmed can be an honest, really somebody that they can negotiate with. That he's not really an honest person, someone that will will keep to his word. And in the end, they feel that a genocide has been committed against the Amhara people under the Abiy regime, and that Abiy Ahmed and his regime must be held accountable. And so our view as an organization and the views of Fanos align, and that's not just the view of AAA and the Fanos. Is really the view, what we believe, the overwhelming majority of Amharas.
When Tewodros talked about national dialogue, the recent joint statement of Amhara civic organizations on national dialogue process came to my mind. AAA is one of the signatories. Please tell for the audience what is the main idea of the statement.
Thank you for this question, Reeyot. I think this touches on a very current and important issue. First, regarding the press statement, this joint statement was signed by over 38 Amhara civic organizations. It was issued on Tuesday, and this was in response to this national dialogue process that we've been seeing unfold in Ethiopia, led by the so-called National Dialogue Commission. This is an institution that was created by the Abiy regime, by the Oromo Prosperity Party, and we felt that as an organization that focuses on human rights, I think it's very important to outline that our priority is the peace, security, and an end to the violations that are being committed against our people, against the genocide, and ultimately to have accountability and to have reconciliation and all of these wonderful things. The problem is, a lot of the time, these national processes are pushed forward in ways that are extremely flawed, that are very exclusionary, excluding particularly the Amhara community and many other communities. And unfortunately, this results in a lack of peace, a lack of justice, and a lack of accountability. So, for example, in the current context, the dialogue is essentially premature because you have ongoing war and genocide against Amharas in the Amhara region. You have this ongoing genocide in Oromia region. You have persecution in Addis Ababa, where everyday people are being profiled and essentially rounded up and arrested and put into detention centers. You have, a multitude of opposition political figures, including parliamentarians or members of parliament who are jailed despite their diplomatic or parliamentarian immunity. And unfortunately, this means that a lot of these leadership figures are either in jail, or you have the ones who have decided to join the Fano and fight on the battlefield in this armed struggle. And I think it's really important to just emphasize that's the context that we're in. And so, a lot of these people, when they give interviews, when they issue press statements, really the underlying theme is that there is an existential threat against the Amhara people in Ethiopia. And unfortunately, they see that there's no other choice but to fight in this war or to resist this government. And so in this context where you have all of these leadership figures who are unavailable to participate, I don't think it's appropriate to push forward a dialogue. The other problem is that it's heavily influenced by the Oromo Prosperity Party, as my colleague Tewodros mentioned. This is a government that is very unreliable, untrustworthy, that is known for backstabbing, for deception, for deceiving even former allies. We can look at, for example, the Amhara population, which really has been betrayed in every way imaginable over the past couple of years, or actually since the beginning, because in the first place, it was the popular resistance among the Amhara and other parts of the country that brought this government to power in the first place, pushing the TPLF government that was very oppressive to the side. And unfortunately, none of the political grievances raised by the people were answered. And in fact, last year, when residents of the Amhara region came out to protest in large-scale anti-government protests, instead of addressing these questions peacefully, which may have mitigated a lot of what we're seeing, the regime chose to declare war on the people instead. And now, over a year later, we're seeing all of the devastation that that has caused. And so that's the context in which this has happened. Regarding the press briefing, for example, some of these final leaders talked about the need for dialogue in their responses. For example, Fanom Asagid Makonnen, who is a writer and journalist and leader of the Amhara Fano Shoa Command, said that they are open to dialogue with various communities within Ethiopia and with international observers present to promote equality. And so, there's a clear understanding that dialogue is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it's clear that there is a lack of trust with the Abiy regime. And in another case, we had engineer Fano Reeyot Alemu, who also said something similar, in which he was saying that they were not interested to negotiate with a murderous criminal regime. This is translated, and they talked about how the end goal of the struggle is regime change, and they were waiting for that to happen before holding a dialogue with brotherly communities across Ethiopia to promote self-governance and leadership. And so it's very important to contextualize. This is the message that's coming from some of the prominent Amhara Fano leaders. And then coming back to the statement, I think there were very key demands from these civic organizations that came together to talk about the need to condemn this flawed process. And some of these demands and preconditions, I think, were very clear, very reasonable. And there's some of them are as follows. For example, an immediate end to all human rights violations committed by the regime and its allied forces, lifting of the state of emergency, lifting of telecommunications and internet blackouts, withdrawal of all non-Amhara or regime allied forces from the region, release of those detained for their identity and political beliefs, a move towards a civilian-led transitional government to promote a democratic transition in Ethiopia, of course facilitated by Fano, unfettered access to the Amhara region for delivery of humanitarian aid and rehabilitation efforts, establishment of an independent international commission to investigate human rights violations against the Amhara people, targeted sanctions against officials and military leaders responsible for these human rights abuses, and so on. And so I think these demands were very clear, and this is a joint statement that was signed on by organizations from various continents from all around the world. And so it's clear there is very widespread consensus among the diaspora about the need to oppose this process. And I think it comes at a very important time as this National Dialogue Commission continues to be pushed forward to international observers who may be misled or not understanding the gravity of the situation in Ethiopia.
Did you want to add on it?
I think Robel did an excellent job of covering this, and what this national dialogue statement that was released and supported by 39 Amhara organizations, really from across the globe, shows that this is really a sham process, and you can't have a national dialogue when the entire Amhara region is at war, and Amharas across the country in Ethiopia are really being hunted down. Tens of thousands being arrested and put into really what amounts to a concentration camp. So there is no true Amhara representation. So how can you have a national dialogue when majority of the population has no representation? The Amhara leaders are either in jail or they're in the jungle fighting against this regime. So it's really, not practical. And one of the things a point that we wanted to hammer was that to the international community, do not be misled. This is a sham process, and legitimizing this attempt to legitimize this process will cause really a terrible response in the future. For example, the international community legitimized the cessation of hostilities agreement, the Pretoria Agreement, at the exclusion of the Amhara people, in an attempt to silence their guns and bring a lasting peace to Ethiopia. We called out the cessation of hostilities agreement at that time, and we said this is a flawed process, it is not inclusive, it is exclusionary, and it will not silence the guns. It did not. The war continued, but it was just the war on the Amhara people. So the Western powers tried to legitimize the cessation of hostilities agreement. What do we have? We have nearly 100,000 Amharas being ethnically cleansed from Raya starting April 15th. And the message that we're sending to the Western powers is, we know what Abiy does. He always creates some kind of a commission, some kind of a task force to try to give himself some kind of legitimacy. The Ethiopian people do not believe it. They know this is a sham process. But what we're telling the international community is, be on the side of the Amhara people, be on the side of the majority of the Ethiopian people, and do not legitimize the sham fraud.
Tewodros mentioned the recent aggression by TPLF in Raya, which has led to the displacement of more than 50,000 people, according to OCHA. What is your organization's stance to resolve Raya and Walqait issue, if there is any?
Ted, can I jump in? Yeah, certainly. I think this is a very important issue, and this is something that we believe hasn't been given its due attention and framing in the international spotlight. Unfortunately, there was this very unprecedented invasion of the Raya area by Tigray region forces, by the TPLF leadership, which is sometimes referred to as the Tigray Interim Region Administration. We've seen multiple statements from top Tigrayan leaders, including Getachew Reda, Taddessa Wareda, and really the reality is that as we speak, there's ethnic cleansing unfolding in the Raya area. And so far from the Raya Alamata, Raya Badla, Zata, Wafla, and surrounding areas, we've seen at least 50,000 Amharas ethnically cleansed. And by some estimates, this could actually have increased to up to 70,000, with some estimates going up to 100,000. And so the scale of this displacement is very serious. This is something that I think is not being given due attention. There's other similar abuses. The invading forces are carrying out extrajudicial killings, sexual and gender-based violence, and destruction and looting of property, with looted items being transported to Mekelle. And this is being done in collaboration with the Abiy regime. And so it's not just the TPLF, it's also the ENDF, the federal police, and these allied forces that have opened this new invasion against the Amhara people in Raya. As we know, the situation in Raya is a longstanding issue in which the indigenous Amhara inhabitants have faced persecution ever since the TPLF annexed the territory in the early 90s. And so what's happening right now, unfortunately, is a repeat of that with ethnic cleansing. And to emphasize, this is the definition for ethnic cleansing by the UN Office for Genocide Prevention is as follows: a purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian population of another ethnic or religious group from certain geographic areas. And this is what's being reported. The humanitarian situation is very dire. It's been reported by the UN OCHA office regarding the situation in the North Wedlo and Wag Khemra areas of Amhara region, with tens of thousands of these displaced persons being displaced to Town and Sekota. And unfortunately, there's risk of expansion of these grave human rights violations with rhetoric that suggests that the TPLF is planning to invade the adjacent Atlamt and potentially the Walqait areas. And we've seen that this has been a very serious issue. AAA has actually issued multiple statements, including one on April 15th, immediately following reports of the mass displacement. This has been independently verified by our investigators on the ground. We've also issued other statements, including one about the humanitarian situation, because as I mentioned, these tens of thousands of displaced people have had to leave their homes without carrying anything. And a lot of these are, members of very vulnerable communities, including women, children, elderly people, people with physical disabilities. And these people don't have access to shelter. They don't have access to food, clean drinking water, life-saving medicine, and other essential items. And unfortunately, the Ethiopian government is complicit in not only their displacement, but also the denial of access to these critical key goods. And unfortunately, international humanitarian organizations, charity organizations are not making enough noise about the growing humanitarian need, nor about the lack of access to the region. And this is a longstanding issue because, as we've talked about before, the war in Amhara is now reaching the 1 year mark. And unfortunately, for 1 year, communities across the Amhara region and adjacent areas have faced similar atrocities at the hands of government allied forces. And so the situation is very dire. We believe it requires very urgent attention. And this goes back to some of these exclusionary policies. The COHA, for example, the Cessation of Hostilities Agreement, could have potentially been instrumental in bringing reconciliation and promoting peace, at the very least, in this very important crisis. Unfortunately, instead of doing that, it excluded the Amhara population, and in many ways actually has unraveled and been shown that this internationally mediated process has not delivered for the Amhara people, has not brought peace to the region. So, this was a deal that was signed in November 2022. It had over 15 articles, and I think just to name a few of them, there was Article 3, the permanent cessation of hostilities; Article 4, protection of civilians; Article 5, humanitarian access; Article 6, DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration; Article 7, confidence building measures; and Article 11, monitoring, verification, and compliance. And in just the articles I mentioned, each and every single one of them has actually been violated either by the TPLF or by the government of Ethiopia. And so, for example, the permanent cessation of hostilities talks about stopping violent acts and hate speech. But as we've seen over the past year, there has been ongoing hate speech by government officials, including top advisors to the Prime Minister himself, such as Daniel Kibret, the ENDF Field Marshal Burhanu Jula, and Abiy Ahmed himself against the Amhara people. Violent acts have continued with grave atrocities in various parts of Amhara region. Our organization documented at least 1,600 civilians killed, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because just, if you think about the lack of telecommunications and internet services reliably in the region, we're not getting all of the data. We don't know exactly how many of these civilians are being killed because they're being killed on a daily basis. Then there's protection of civilians. It goes without saying the civilians are not being protected. And then there's humanitarian access. The Amhara region is not getting humanitarian access. Over the last couple of years since the signing of the deal and before, we've actually seen the majority of humanitarian aid in the country going to Tigray. And so unfortunately, the Amhara region has not been getting the proportional help that it needs, given that it was devastated not only by the recent war, but also the northern Ethiopia war. So unfortunately, this was also not done. And then under this humanitarian access article, it also talks about facilitating the return and reintegration of IDPs. And this is hypocritical because, as we just mentioned, there's actually been further displacement of Amhara people from the Raya area. And not only the Raya area, but other areas as well, such as areas in Amhara, such as Aura Godana. And so a similar issue there with ethnic cleansing, this time by the Oromia region forces. And then DDR. The DDR agreement was that there was going to be disarmament of heavy armaments and light weapons within 30 days of the agreement. And clearly this has not happened, as the Tigray region is invading the Raya area, and with help from the federal government. And Getachew Reda himself, in multiple press statements, had talked about the fact that they have over 200,000 armed fighters. And so this is a blatant breach of the peace deal. And then confidence building measures, for example, Article 7, it talks about refraining from conscription, training, deployment, mobilization, or preparation for conflict and hostilities. And our organization had reported that all of these things were happening almost immediately after the signing of the peace deal. So this was completely violated as well. And then monitoring, verification, and compliance. This was supposed to be a mechanism involving the African Union and IGAD for monitoring the implementation of the deal. And clearly, these international observers were either unwilling or unable to verify this is happening. But what's clearly happening is that there was an exclusionary process. It sidelined the key stakeholders, and it failed to bring lasting peace, promote justice, or accountability. And now Amharas are paying the price for it, as well as other Ethiopians.
If there is anything you want to add, Teddy, you can.
Oh, specific to this question about the invasion of Raya by the TPLF?
Yeah.
I think one thing I'd like to add here, Reeyot, is that at the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, AAA came out and said that, and described this agreement that excluded Amharas as a war pact between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Oromo Prosperity Party against the Amhara people. That's how we described it, because that's what it is. And we're seeing it play in action.
Because Oromo Prosperity Party is a dominant one, you described like that,
is a dominant party, and there was no Amhara representation, an Amhara political party, a genuine Amhara political party that was in the process. In fact, actually, there was a negotiation team that was really supported by the Amhara people, that was put forward, right, to the backers of these of the Pretoria agreement, and but this Amhara negotiating team was excluded, and so Amharas were not represented in the Pretoria agreement in a similar way as Amharas were not represented in the 1990s in London, when it was when the TPLF, the Oromo Liberation Front, came together and paved the path to basically instill this ethnic apartheid system. Amharas were not represented, so we keep repeating a process where Amharas are excluded in the 90s in this Pretoria agreement, and in this Pretoria agreement, the similar groups come together, and when you see how it's being played out right now, it was the TPLF and Abiy's military that allowed the TPLF to come in, ethnically cleanse tens of thousands of Amharas, right? And now for TPLF to take over, some parts of the Reeyot Alemu area. But we had warned that this is going to intensify the war. And that's what it is doing. It is intensifying the war. When you oppress people, when you try to normalize massacres, normalize a genocide, when you try to humiliate a population, that same population, that same people is going to fight back. And that's what we are witnessing right now. Amharas across the globe are fighting back. So we had described it as a war pact, and that's what it is. It is the TPLF and the Oromo Prosperity Party coming together, to take away really the identity of Amharas in these areas. And we're going to see the war intensify more and more. And we had warned that this is going to expand the war beyond the Amhara region. Because when you have the TPLF coming in and invading again, obviously Amharas are going to fight back in the same way that they're fighting against Abiy and his military. So this is something that we foresaw. It's not very difficult. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to have a PhD in geopolitics to understand this. And so this is what we had warned, and this is what's happening. The only difference being right now is that the Amhara people are fighting back. Unlike the 1990s, Amharas are organizing, and they're fighting for their survival. This press statement on the National Dialogue, it clearly shows that we have 39 Amhara organizations from the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, coming together and speaking with one voice, saying this is a fraud process, saying that the Pretoria Agreement was a fraud process, and the Amhara people have no obligation to adhere to this fraud process that excluded them and put their people at risk. That is the difference between now and the 1990s. So the politics of Ethiopia has changed forever, because Amhara people are waking up. They have become conscious. They are not going to allow the normalization of a massacre of innocent people. They are not going to allow normalization of injustice. They are not going to allow a normalization of terror. They said enough is enough. That's why they said Bakan, and they're pushing back and they're fighting back. And so, and this is something that I think is not clear enough really understood by the international stakeholders, because it's still fairly new in terms of Amhara's organizing. But that's why as an organization, we work hard for Amhara leaders in Ethiopia to give them a voice so that they can engage directly with the international community. As a result of that press briefing, several of the finals now have been quoted in major international media. Le Point, one of the top 3 largest magazines based in Paris, France, quoted Engineer Bayena. They also quoted, Abebe Fanta, the PR for Miss Rockfado. And I think really it's important, for our people to understand in terms of like what they said, because this press briefing was conducted right after the Addis Ababa operation. And this is what Engineer Bayena said about the Addis Ababa operation. He said similar operations will continue to be mounted by the Fano. And he was quoted by Le Point. And he said that only key figures in Abiy Ahmed's government are targeted. And Fano Abebe Fanta quoted in Le Point when regards to transitioning from the Abiy regime. This is what he said: the Amharas are a people of peace. That, and according to him, the Fanos control 60% of the region. The next step is to work with other Ethiopians to overthrow Abiy's regime and establish democratic rule. So now this is the Fanos speaking with international stakeholders, and more of this has come out. In 2023, we had facilitated for the interview of Mary Wadajo, and he's also been quoted in the continent. So I know it's a long response in terms of to your question, but I think they're all interrelated.
No problem. Thank you for your time. Lastly, if you want to add about what is your next step or something you want to tell for the people about the AAA or the other things, it's open. Robel.
Certainly. Thank you, Reeyot. I think, this is now an issue that's been unfolding in Ethiopia for many years. This is something that's been preceding even the Abiy regime, but which intensified under the Abiy regime. So at this point, millions of families from across the country, family members even beyond Ethiopia, have been affected by the genocide, by the ethnic cleansing, by conflict, war, political repression. And so I think what the Ethiopian people are actually asking for is very simple. It's just peace, right? Peace, democracy, equality, very core values that I think a lot of us in the West are able to enjoy to some extent. But unfortunately, Ethiopia has been cursed with very terrible governments, ruling parties that are very authoritarian, and I think this describes the Abiy regime. And so, for us as advocates, as members of civic organizations, I think there's a very strong duty to advocate on behalf of these people, to educate, for example, the world about the human rights violations that are unfolding, to ensure that they know the truth, and that we can be a voice for the voiceless victims, because a lot of these things have been happening for a long time. I think it's been unknown by so many people, and that's really a shame, because nobody should be suffering in silence. This needs to come out, and that's where we can eventually lead to justice and accountability. And these are all things that AAA is pursuing. AAA has continued to issue updates on a daily basis, reports, updates about the situation in Ethiopia, to ensure that the international community, but also members of our own community, and the members of the Ethiopian diaspora, could be informed about what's happening. This can be a reference, a source for information, but ultimately recording the human rights violations. The intent is to document the genocide, document the repression, document the atrocities, and eventually hold the perpetrators accountable. And so this extends to the Abiy regime, his cabinet members, Abiy himself, the military generals, the likes of Birhanu Jula, the likes of even the Amhara Branch Prosperity Party officials, the likes of Temesgen Turuna, the likes of the list goes on. And so these individuals need to be held accountable. They need to face accountability for their complicity in the crimes that are happening against innocent people. And this is something that for us in the diaspora, especially from the perspective of AAA, are continuing to work on through various initiatives. A large part of the work is also about raising awareness about the genocide. For example, There was the film that AAA helped to commission, directed by filmmaker Graham Peebles, about the Amhara genocide in Oromia region. It's called We're Still Breathing, and it's going to be available digitally soon, but also will be shown in theaters across the United States, across Canada, and possibly beyond. And so that's, I think, a very powerful film for those interested. Stay updated with AAA by following us on social media, on X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, our website, www.amharaamerica.com, .org. And also donate. The work of AAA is made possible through generous donations from our supporters. We're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Ted's a volunteer. Our colleagues are. We have a team of very dedicated young people who have been in the struggle for longer with a lot of experience, who are united in their vision to promote peace, justice, and accountability. And so we need your support. If there are people who are interested to help and volunteer themselves, that's also an option. And so these are all some ways that you can help, just to give you a sense of AAA's direction. If there's anything I missed, Ted, please feel free to supplement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Teddy.
I think Robel really covered, most of these important points. In terms of some of the activities that are coming up with regard to AAA, there's going to be some seminars that we're going to be hosting to educate non-Ethiopians about the situation in the country and the humanitarian crisis that the Amhara people are facing. Educate them. These seminars will be along issues around national dialogue, the transitional justice. There are, Amharas now who are writing articles and op-eds about this to educate the broader community, which is really commendable. I think I would like to call out an article recently written by Henok Abebe, Dr. Yirga as well on these pieces. And so there's a lot of educational opportunities that we have that we're going to take advantage of. In addition to that, we are continuing to engage, the State Department. There's not really a week that goes by that we're not engaging several members of Congress to continue to lobby and to pressure. We're also, reaching out and working, collaborating with Amhara organizations here in the U.S. in preparation for the upcoming election. One of the things that we're asking Amhara organizations is, to organize, get out to vote campaigns so that they can register Amharas to vote, educate them about their local candidates so that they can go out there and vote. Engage with these candidates that are, for the that are running for office, not just really, Congress at the federal level, but also their state legislatures, their mayors, their governors, the city council, their town council members. There's a lot of opportunity to engage. We're going to be showcasing the documentary. There are other documentaries that are that we're considering to do. This is very difficult. It's very time consuming. In addition to that, collaborating with Amhara organizations across the globe to provide humanitarian relief, to Amharas who, millions of Amharas, as you know well, Reeyot, that there are, thousands of schools that have been closed. Children are not going to school. Many of the hospitals are damaged. So, people are not getting health services. And as Robel said earlier, there's really no humanitarian aid coming into Amhara region. So there's a lot of work that we're working on, and really just, I have to take this opportunity to really thank, the team for working nonstop every day. If you follow AAA on X, if you follow AAA on Facebook or on our website, there's not a day that goes by that we're not posting something, that we're not engaging you, our supporters, or the broader international community about what is happening to Amhara people. It is our job. It is our obligation. This is something that we will continue to do. And, we're, very confident and optimistic that the future for Amharas and Ethiopia is bright because, Amharas across the globe are engaged. You saw the press statement with 39 Amhara civic organizations. These are not political parties. These are civic organizations. And you see, and you can sense the sense of, really Amharas feel like they are in a state of emergency across the globe. That's why you're seeing the emergence of so many civic organizations, because at the grassroots level, this is how you come and organize yourself. And what you see is Amharas become organized at the local level, and then they come and start collaborating and working together. And so when you see people doing this, responding in this manner, eventually the result of that would be good. So we're very optimistic. Really, that's all I have to say. And with that also, Reeyot, thank you for inviting Robel and I and having us on your program. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to coming back again and in talking to you.
Thank you, both. Thank you for watching, dear viewers, and also I want to apologize for the technical problems. See you again.
Okay. Thank you, Reeyot.